Aristotle is just positing a temporally first cause, right, to end the causal chain. And since that temporally first cause can't be a sensible material particular, well, bam, we got God, right? And that's, of course, a terrible argument. And he's right to put his finger on it. If that's what Aristotle is doing, then this is BS. So Tim's very good at calling BS. But I just and it just kind of helped me focus on something else that might make it clear that I don't think that Aristotle is engaging in that kind of argument. But as is my wont, that will require a somewhat lengthy digression. And
so just point of,
yes,
you do have your participants window open so you can see the hands raised in the right order. Just
oh, thank you very much. A call to order. Excellent. I appreciate it. Hey, Clark's made it. Are you in your car again? Yeah, sounds like you might be.
Yes, I am. I am in my car.
Okay, well, awfully great to have you. Bo, are we recording yet? We're recording. All right. Who knows if Tim's going to come? So I'm going to double check my messages on the webpage to see if anybody's asking about the link one more last time. And then I'm happy to dive in here. All right. Looks like Garth just RSVP'd, but he is not here yet. Okay. All right. Let's launch into this. So yeah, thanks Rashid for spearheading this conversation. I'm glad that that conversation last week got you thinking and gave us a really, really good example. And if Tim arrives today, I'd like to you present that thought to him and see how it meshes with the way in which he's thinking this. But I just had a little kind of I had a little epiphany that I brought up last time, but I wasn't able to develop, and so I wasn't able to show its relevance and perhaps its import. Right? And that is, I'm not going to argue against whether Aristotle is using a God of the gaps kind of argument or something like that. But I did want to kind of sidestep this whole issue by pursuing this one line of thought and hopefully demythologizing this divine element a little bit in Aristotle without naturalizing it. Anybody knows me, I don't naturalize anything.
You're not Quine?
I'm not. No. Naturalism is a set of blinders. But okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to think about a scientist, any scientist, doing her work, right? And so in doing her work, she will be engaging with a problem. And that problem will require her recognizing certain regularities and giving the mathematical formulation. And in giving the mathematical formulation, she is able to then integrate them into more general laws that organize her field, say molecular biology, right? And then under ideal circumstances, she will be able to integrate those into higher order laws in such a way that those higher order laws can then be ideally integrated into whatever is the highest order of law of science. Let's say the law of physics. So that should be fairly familiar kind of method to everyone in modern scientific inquiry. So what I want to dial in on is this. what is the concept of law that is functioning in this method? I don't care what she thinks about laws. I don't care about any scientist stepping outside of their inquiry and then pontificating about laws. I want to know what is the concept that is integral to doing the work of science, right? And then if you follow that out, you know what the concept of law that is internal to method and not internal to anybody's psychology, right? This law that we are trying to achieve, right, is in the ideal at the highest order. It is highest. It is first. It is a first cause, right? It is universal. It covers all particulars. Okay. It is. Let me see. It is one. It's not a congeries. It's not a loose assemblage of different unrelated laws. It is one. And in being one, it is the unity of everything that it covers. And therefore, it is one, it is unifying in being one. And since its scope is universal, it is the unity of everything. It is the unity of everything. It is one. It is infinite, right? Nothing is outside of its scope. The only thing that's outside of its scope is nothing. And so it is the boundary between being and nothing, right? And in that sense, and only in that sense, you can say it creates the world, because the world as one is not a whole bunch of unrelated, undifferentiated things, but it is one cosmos in the Greek sense, right? And so the law is the ground of the unity of all that is. And that is what makes all that is in a world. None of this stuff would be in a world if it didn't have this prior unity. It's power and it's act. It doesn't start and stop. It doesn't sometimes act and then sometimes flag and wane and attenuate, right? It is pure act. It is always acting. And it is always, so it's always acting. Since it doesn't start and stop, nothing prior to it can or is needed to actualize its potential to act, right? So since it never moves, there's no efficient cause to explain it, because efficient causes only explain motion. So as not moving, it is timeless. It is not in time. It is timeless. It's eternal. It doesn't come and go. And since it has no perceptual shape and it's not one of the sensible particulars that it explains, it's immaterial. So, and it's not created by higher power, because it is that power. It is that power already. So, in modern science, we are oriented in our work, not necessarily in the philosophy of science, but in our work, we are oriented towards an understanding of what the goal is of science, which is to be explanatory. And it's explanatory because it explains through the law, right? And the law, as it happens, if you look at it in its functioning and not in all the little theories that are ideological about it, you'll find this whole range of divine attributes, right? It's universal, it's infinite, it's pure act, it's immaterial, it's eternal. And it's not, we don't need to go to the idea that it's someone, that it's personal, right? We're already far enough along in seeing that when we explicate explication, right? We are looking for that which explains. And as Peter's mentioned several times, you know, the proper causes are always higher order. And I want to show that our law, as it's normally understood, is that higher order thing. And it does have those so-called divine attributes without necessarily being a God the way religions think about God. So when we want to, you know, try to understand what Aristotle is doing, one way to think about it is he's trying to get us to understand how explication is possible and how it terminates in such a thing as this law that is one, it's the ground of unity, it's eternal, it's immaterial, it's the form of the world and therefore makes the world. And it is pure act, it is pure power, it is the ground for the motion and the being of all things. That is what it is to explain, is to find find the ground of explanation, find the satisfying explanatory account in something like that. And so we don't need to worry too much about God of the gaps. All we need to do is focus on what is the nature of that which is explanatory. And every explanatory endeavor will be oriented towards this. And so it's, to use my language, you know, it's internal to the understanding of to any understanding that of what's explanatory, right? The why. It is it is the answer to the why. But you have to do the work. You have to go into the details. How is it the answer to the why? Right. So by taking this detour, I was hoping to show first of all that this something divine, to keep bringing it up, is nothing religious, but it does have a lot of attributes that religions will then employ to describe their object of worship. So science utilizes these divine attributes in its ideal explanation, but doesn't worship them, right? So its structure is different. And once we see how this, you know, unity and infinity and immateriality and timelessness, these are all just attributes of the law, and that's what every scientific inquiry is searching for, and that's why explanation is lawful explanation, integration into the law. We see, so to speak, all these metaphysical dimensions start, I don't know, showing themselves in every human explanation, every act of human explanation, or human active explanation. All right. So unsurprisingly, Tim has raised his hand. I'm so I didn't know you were coming. I was going to wait for you so you could hear my whole spiel. But you might have to just check out the recording later to get
that's fine, and I can appreciate what you're saying. Although I just want to, and I get tired of the argument and the debate, so I really don't want to like derail what we're doing today with this. All I want to say is, just like I said last time, is not a problem of that it's God or not. It's the problem is that positing something that's inexplicable as an explanation for anything is not actually explaining anything. And so that's where I stand with this. And to me, it still feels like we're just by fiat declaring this thing out there that explains everything, but we have no explanation for it.
Mm-hmm. So
that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to just bite my tongue, because
Excellent.
I don't think the text really today deals with this too much
right.
anyway. So,
right. So unfortunately, a corollary of what you're saying is that by necessity, science can't understand what it's doing, right? And I don't think that we want to go that far.
I'm talking about philosophy. I'm not talking about science.
Well, my whole prelude was about the way in which the concept of law functions in actual scientific work, rather than reflection, philosophical reflection later on it. But the actual concept that's employed in integrating sensible particulars into a lawful framework, and then integrating that framework into higher order laws. Right. So, what is the nature of law that's going on there? Right. And scientists certainly very much understand what they're doing. They're integrating into a unity. But if we think about the nature of that unity, it's not the nature of anything that's itself explained. And indeed, it satisfies our need for explanation. So it's not actually positing, it's not deriving the mysterious from the more mysterious. It's actually the other way around. We're deriving what is questionable from something that is unquestionable, that is comprehension. And what we as philosophers want to do is we want to dive into that and ask into its nature, right? What is its inner form? How is it articulated? How is it one? What makes it the comprehension that it is, that we all are satisfied with when we show that some seemingly unrelated behaviors in our sensible field are all expression of a law. And so the law is actually, it is transparently comprehensible. And it is indeed not mysterious. And that's what's kind of interesting then to go into that nature. So anyways, that would be my challenge back, Tim, but I appreciate your precision on this. Charlie.
I've been reading the Joseph Owens commentary
Yeah, great.
as we go along.
Awesome.
And he has a couple of footnotes in there about the idea of the divine. And I don't know if this is helpful or not. He said, you can't think of the divine as the idea of a Christian God or something like that. You need to think of the divine when Aristotle uses that term in the same way that he uses the word anthropos. He puts the definite article in front of it, whole anthropos.
Right.
He said he does the same thing when he uses the idea of theos, of divinity or God. I hate to use that word.
Yeah. No.
He said it is whole theos.
Yeah.
And it is to be understood in the same way as whole anthropos, that we understand that we're not talking about a particular man, we're talking about the universal. And
Yeah.
the same thing with the idea of the theos.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a particular God or a particular personality or anything of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
That all came much later in thought.
Right. You know, and
we're thinking about just the idea of divinity, and that it is actually a logical necessity that you arrive at. That it isn't, it isn't something that you, and I understand Tim's point that you say, well, okay, here's how we explain it. Bingo. You just say, this is what does it, without any grounding or anything of that sort. But here in this case, I think you have to be thinking in terms of metaphysics and what is possible and what is necessary. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
I mean, it's all helpful to reflect on these matters. Yeah, I'm not going to speak for Tim, but I'm going to let, because I think Tim's challenge is more unsettling than the way you presented it. Mm-hmm. So if Tim wants to address that, I'm totally open.
I mean, no, it doesn't. I mean, I appreciate the effort. I don't think it helps me. And I think that if we can come to a universal and a necessary through logic itself, that logic provides the ground for it, then I can accept it.
Right.
But just, that it takes a lot of work to get there. And I don't see Aristotle yet going through that work.
Excellent.
He just posits it, and it's not good enough for me.
Makes total sense. So, do I have since you're being so indulgent to me, I wanted to just read a page from this marvelous book. Just, to kind of frame the Greek relationship to divinity. And so I wanted to just read out loud a bit, because I think it's very powerfully expressed and gets at kind of what I want to be exploring a bit, and that is, the difference between a representation of the divine and a concept that's at the same time the standard for whether the term divine is being used correctly or not, right? So anyway, I'm just going to read this, and then if anybody wants to talk about it a little bit, that's cool, but otherwise we'll get into the reading because I know you all prepared for it. Here's starting, we are concerned here. We are concerned here with a universal concept of philosophy. It is a love for Sophia and is recognizable as the habit to justify one's statements, to argue most precisely according to a set of common rules. We can approach philosophy as a universal concept via the following deliberation. Insofar as we know historical life, humans have always placed their daily needs, wants, and experiences into a complex conceptual framework. They developed a unified worldview. They told each other stories about their origins. They explained their hierarchies through images, buildings, or poems. They created models for what one must and must not do. They found ways to explain their experiences of natural phenomena like day and night, summer and winter. To establish some connection with Eckhart, I illuminate my point about the production of universal conceptual frameworks through the example of religion. Okay, now here we're getting to it. There are several ways of generalizing one's religion beyond a single prescription or statement, and it happens even in everyday life, not just as an academic exercise. Some people, for example, think of everything religious as a form of venerating their ancestors, or as adhering to the church calendar. A third model portrays the kingdom of God as a royal court and subsumes individual rituals and statements under this image. God in this scenario is called the Lord. He is conceptualized in the same terms as those used to describe a pharaoh or the Persian great king. He is surrounded by heavenly hosts who execute his will in quasi-military ways. He demands obedience. Questioning his commands is taboo. Part of the royal court model of religion is the ruling Lord is seen, admired.
What do you think?
Huh.
So you can tap here. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to work. So I want to see this walk. This is the old way of checking without a gauge. You hold it here, you hold it out.
Clark, I think you're mute. Thanks.
I just muted Clark. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, yeah, so, right. This won't take too much longer. Part of the royal court model of religion is the ruling Lord is seen, admired, and applauded by his servants. He wants to be praised. His staff function as messengers. They intervene when necessary. They acclaim him constantly. There is a clear hierarchy, even among the servants. Such a unified picture shapes a person's interpretation and conduct of life. Gaining and retaining the Lord's favor is important. His wrath is terrible. A victory in war is a sign of God's favor. If one asks what is right, the answer is whatever the Lord wants is right. If one asks what thunder is, a sign of God's anger. A rainbow signals his reconciliation. Other cultures gave other answers. Right, people determined, was what arose from reason or from what, Right, people determined, was what arose from reason or from what the people wanted. In historical time, I mean, for as long as we've had written sources, There have always been competing views of society and concepts of religion. Some of these could be combined, for example, the royal court image with a religious calendar and a commitment to sing praise. But when adherents of these competing views started to quarrel with one another, philosophy was born. It is to be distinguished from the production of myths, epic stories, and general rules as a later phenomenon. Later to myths and epic stories. It is a Greek invention arising between the time of Homer and that of Parmenides as a self-commitment to justify one's assertions. When someone asks for the justification for these rules, new debates arise. There are other preconditions, and they do have them, appear difficult to pin down. They trail off into indefiniteness. Nobody can survey them all. And thus the discussion continues. These controversies form the history of philosophy. Philosophy interfered with Greek religion. It told the Homeric gods that a new time has come, one in which they were no longer able to do whatever they pleased. It stipulated fixed criteria for them. If they wanted to continue to be seen as gods, they had to be considerate, just, and good. Otherwise, they would not be true gods, but popular fantasies or inventions of the poets. And as Aristotle and Heraclitus and Plato before him had said, poets often lie. The one God worthy of adoration was the one that adhered to the criteria of truth, goodness, and justice. A purifying storm had come to cleanse both popular religion and Homer. Homer should have been whipped, counseled Heraclitus. And while Plato was more polite, he still had him moved to the fringes of the state and honorably deposed. In his book, Werner Jaeger describes the beginnings of philosophy up to Plato as this type of work, correcting the royal court model of religion, replacing the feuding heavenly clans with a single god, stressing wisdom over capriciousness, ungrudging goodness and justice over incontestable power, the world as cosmos and physis, not a mere footstool for God. One last little bit. Truly, a new time had begun. Now philosophers determined, though at first only for an intellectual elite, what a real and true God could be. Their actions were at once pious and rebellious. God, Plato said, has to be good. He does not observe human skills with envy. He is not angry with us for wanting to know. The philosopher's God once was a God of purification, of ethical sublimation, of the popular and Homeric gods. His arrival marked the end of courtly religion, and the Stoics and Neoplatonists pushed this agenda consistently, albeit in different ways. The skeptics criticized and laughed. Okay. End of reading. Oh, sorry, I can't. Yeah. So my part of my point is, where do the standards come from, and how do we understand that there are standards for such a thing as God in the first place? And certainly what those standards are will be the nature of the thing that we might want to critique and say, well, there is no such thing as that. But it's just this move of philosophy to recognize that in all sensible particulars, including the way people talk about gods in Homer and myth, right? There is implied in all of that a standard of evaluation for the nature of those beings. And philosophy is precisely making that conscious, or I don't even want to use that expression. I want to say these implicit standards are what philosophy makes explicit. And philosophy's work is the explicitation of the implicit, these standards. And as Flasch makes clear, this is both, a work, it could be, well, it's a work of piety and, it's a work of piety and a work of rebellion at the same time. So, and that's exactly what Socrates was to his contemporaries. All right. I've said a lot. Thank you very much for indulging me in that. I did want to get across this whole idea, this different idea of what the philosophical discourse on the divine is and how it differs from historical conceptions of religion and historical conceptions of science, given my introductory remarks. So I'm happy to wrap that up and head actually to the assigned text. But if anybody has any remarks, about it before we plunge in, feel free.
I just think that we need to say what we're talking about. And Aristotle's biggest failure in that regard was even to consider it to be like a further explication or the right explication of God. It's really, we're not talking about God, we're talking about standards, we're talking
Right.
about thoughts, we're talking about philosophy. So God needs to be justified, not asserted. And there is no God when we're talking about standards and philosophy and thought. Why even use the term? Because that's not what we're talking about. So anyway.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, my answer was trying to show in the scientific, the example of scientific practice, that these so-called divine attributes are implied in the nature of the law that scientists use for explication. And so we philosophers, not scientists, because the law is not empirical, so it's not amenable to empirical investigation. So scientists can't really investigate it. But we philosophers can, and we can wonder, right, and ask marvelous questions about how this, how a law can be explanatory, and how can anything have this nature of being timeless and immaterial and pure act and all the rest of it, and pursue that line of inquiry. And I think that's the line of inquiry that Aristotle is taking in the metaphysics and reserving for the metaphysics, because it's not a line of inquiry that he can, for methodological reasons, explore in the actual physics or in the ethics or in the parts of animals, right? Here we're, at the nature of we're looking at the nature of what makes something explanatory, to put it in very sober terms.
Right.
Rather than divine, we'll just say the explanatory, right? We can get rid of the divine now. Now we're just talking about names. We can get rid of we can call it Ralph, this amazing Ralph that is.
Why call it that? Because we're talking about explanation, we're talking about standards, we're talking about philosophy, we're talking about thought. So let's just use those words. We already have words for that. We don't need a name for it.
Right.
So anyway, that's
awesome.
Let's move on.
All right, I got
time. I'm going to move on.
Okay. Fair enough. Tyler, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to say that if one or God or whatever explanation you want to appeal to is going to be just a sort of another fire, water, earth, or whatever it is, Aristotle has already highlighted that he's going to have a problem with that.
Right.
So it's not something that he's just sort of asserting here. It's something that we're going to have to work up to, and we're going to have to understand how it can be, what role it plays in a larger explanation rather than just positing it.
Right. Awesome. Okay.
Right. And when we get to that point where we understand it, let's call it what it is. And it's not going to be God, because we know what God is. God is this thing that came from tribal human ritual. And that's not what we're going to arrive at. We're going to arrive at something much better, much higher. It's going to have nothing to do with the mythologies of the past and some man that we call he.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's quite true.
I think both Aristotle and Plato rejected the sort of colloquial gods of their culture, so I don't think we have to worry about that. But there is an issue that you can't call something what it is, because nothing is going to reduce to a name.
Well, we're going to use words to describe it when we get there. And so I'm satisfied with the words that describe it, not the word that doesn't.
Excellent. Okay, let's let the divine rest now for a little bit, and the oppositions are clear, and we'll just see how the text progresses and how are we to even engage in these kinds of questions, right? But I am going to use this notion of law and everything that's implied in it as occasionally as, you know, this mysterious object of metaphysics, you know, that we're actually inquiring into. But let us just briefly recall that Aristotle is not saying that there is a science of metaphysics. He's inquiring into its possibility, right? And these first 3 chapters are all the questions and all the concerns and all the you know, historical considerations that go into that need to be dealt with if we're to come to any kind of conclusion about the question: is there a science of metaphysics? Is there wisdom? Is there a science, one science of primary causes and starting points? And can they all be encompassed in one science, or do we need many for that? So Aristotle hasn't come down one way or the other yet in this text. He will in Gamma, but right now he's just putting all the considerations that need to be dealt with if we're to say yes or if we're to say no to this question. Okay, cool. Let me see. Does somebody have the Reeve translation that they can share a screen share with? Thank you. And that would be starting on page 31. Right. So the first two paragraphs, let's just read them and then just briefly discuss, you know, what is Aristotle's method here? Because it's kind of interesting. You know, how is he proposing, or what is he suggesting that we must do if we're actually to make contact with the questions of metaphysics? Do I have a reader amongst you? Somebody who's willing to read?
Suppose I can read.
Awesome, thank you. So just go ahead and do the first two paragraphs, and then what I want to hear from people is not only, you know, whatever thoughts you might have had or questions, but also, you know, what's the method that he's saying we have to follow if we're going to make any progress in this question? Is there such a thing as an object of metaphysics? Is there science of metaphysics? All right, go ahead, Tyler, thanks.
It is necessary, with a view to the science we are inquiring into, first to go over topics about which we should first raise puzzles. These include both topics about which people have supposed divergent things, as well as any supreme from these that may have been overlooked. Now, for those who wish to be puzzle-free, it is useful to go through the puzzles well. For the subsequent puzzle-free condition is reached by untying the knots produced by the puzzles raised in advance, and it is not possible to untie a knot you are unaware of. But a puzzle in thought makes clear the existence of a knot in the subject matter. For insofar as thought is puzzled, it is like people who are tied up, since in both cases it is impossible to move forward. That is why we must get a theoretical grasp on all the difficulties beforehand, both for these reasons and because those who inquire without first going through the puzzles are like people who do not know where they have to go. And in addition, a person who has not already grasped the puzzles does not even know whether he has found what he is inquiring into. For to someone like that, the end is not clear, whereas to a person who has already grasped the puzzles, it is clear. Further, a person is necessarily in a better position to make a judgment when, as if they were opposing parties in a court case, he has heard all the contending arguments.
Awesome, thanks. So what's he saying about the science he's inquiring into and these puzzles? And do we have a counterexample, or how are we to think about this? This seems strange, and it seems like you solve the puzzles, and then you can begin the science as two separate acts. But he seems to be suggesting that you can't separate it quite that way. What were your thoughts? Anybody want to share?
Well, I mean, isn't the question going into it is are there different sciences?
Mm.
And so, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So he is saying, first of all, we have to solve these puzzles, and or maybe not solve them, but at least know them,
Mm.
know what they are.
Right.
And then we'll have the tools to be able to tell whether or not there are different sciences or not.
Right. Peter, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was also wondering that in some sense, it almost seems like putting the cart before the horse. If you have to know what the problems in the thing you're studying are before you can even study it, it seems like a hard thing to get started there. On the other hand, not knowing what the problems are, yeah, it will lead you to gloss over all the important issues.
Right, right. So I mean, yeah. So I mean, that is helpful actually, because that allows us to distinguish between, like, if we take a science like physics, we need to distinguish what problems have to be solved in order to find out whether physics is a science at all, as opposed to the specific theories and the specific obstacles that science, the physics as a science might encounter, right? Two different levels. One is the question of whether the science exists, and what would what would count as a reason pro or contra whether the science exists or not. And then afterwards, if you have the science already constituted, then you have all those so-called physics problems, right? I don't know if that's in line with what you were suggesting, Peter, but that's what occurred to me. Rich?
I'm not sure if I'm just going to cover some of the same territory that you all have been covering, but I'll try another formulation.
Awesome.
I think the puzzles that Aristotle is concerned with would be, so my guess is that it would be puzzles of common sense. So like in Little Book Alpha, when he was going through, like, you know, the endless causes, that would almost be like a kind of problem of like common sense. Like if someone just kept asking you, like, you know, 5-year-old style, why, eventually you'd have to say either you don't know, or else you'd have to acknowledge that there's something more here to look into. So I think those are the types of experiences that would give rise to the puzzles that then concern Aristotle, and then cause him to undertake inquiry of metaphysics.
Awesome. So you, yeah, and I think that some of the puzzles do stem from common sense, indeed. Philip?
Yeah, is this like the problem that Hegel raises in the introduction to the phenomenology about, you know, it's not like there's subject and object and there's tools that grasp object, but the puzzles are themselves the working of mind that we're seeking to, that mind is seeking to clarify itself about.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a kind of understanding of this that I'm very sympathetic to, right? Where do the puzzles come from? They don't come from any observable phenomenon, right? And so where do they come from? Well, they come from, right? They come from thinking about the nature of the kind of knowledge, right? So we're we're trying to obtain knowledge about a kind of knowledge and whether that kind of knowledge is possible. And so it's, so to speak, completely and totally internal to the intellect and the way in which the intellect has conceived the nature of science and the nature of things that can be studied by science. And it seems like metaphysics is challenging that, that hierarchy of sciences and their objects, because if you just take their example and just try to apply it to metaphysics, nothing makes sense anymore. Garth?
So these, sorry,
No, go ahead. Follow up.
these puzzles are not personal, right? It's not like Richard has one set of puzzles and I have another set of puzzles.
Right.
They're puzzles for thinking, qua thinking.
Yeah, no, nicely put. Yes. At least I agree with that line. I mean, I don't if somebody has a problem with it, it's totally fine. We can talk about it, but I think that's a very concise way to put it.
This pertains to what I was going to say, which is that I think Aristotle's really trying in these 3 paragraphs, I guess, to speak in a very pedestrian way to perhaps to non-philosophers, because I think, you know, one problem that you could pose is like, how do you know if you understand or not, basically? And each person at a different point in the gaining of understanding or the development of wisdom could encounter different puzzles. And I think, you know, what Philip's saying about the puzzles being non-personal is true in one sense. Like, yes, these puzzles aren't something that is personal to a person and that other people inherently can't understand. But at the same time, the puzzle could arise for somebody because of something that they don't yet understand.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not really like solvable, right? It has to, you have to have some development of personal understanding in order to be able to solve the puzzle. And so I think that's what he's trying to relate here.
Right. No, I think that's good. And I think that it relates to the idea of what counts in this domain as a solution. Like if somebody offers a suggestion as a solution, what criteria is that solution supposedly fulfilling to be a solution, right? And I think Aristotle is reaching back and saying, you know, it can only be a solution if it's an answer to the kind of problem that we're thinking about from the very beginning, namely whether this kind of science is possible. And the problems that arise from that are so to speak, are going to be the criteria for assessing the solution along the path of the science progresses along. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, thank you. That helped me articulate that thought a little bit better than I had before. So I don't know. Yeah, Rich, you want to jump in?
Just a follow up. So Philip had mentioned that it was problems of thought qua thought, and Michael, you seem to agree with that. And the way I've approached this so far, my thinking would have indicated something like thinking qua thinking is actually where the solution lies. It's the problems that get us into that mindset or practice, that because they can't be resolved just by, say, experience or common sense, or they can't be solved without thought and without love. So that was my way of thinking, and I'm wondering, because you all seem to think that the problems lied in thought qua thought, and so if I have a question, it would be something like, what would an example of such a problem be?
Well, I mean, it's no accident that everybody who's contributed to this conversation thus far is in the Hegel group. And so there's a certain like-mindedness going on here, and that might distort things, and I'm totally open to pushbacks on that. So I think that your question is super important, Rich, and I think the best way to do it justice is to look at some of the problems that Aristotle himself gives and see how this might be interpreted or best understood as a problem thought has with itself, right? And that thought would then be, or the intellect would be in comprehending the problems that block its view on this science. It is at once establishing the contours of this science, and in the exact same act, coming to a self-comprehension of itself. And that these are not two distinct activities, but one. And I think that, I'm using idealist language, but I think that Aristotle's language reflects this, and that's kind of what I'm trying to tease out here, to the extent to which it does reflect it and to the extent to which it doesn't reflect it. But it's an interesting methodological reflection that he's doing here, all right? You won't know what any answer in metaphysics means if you haven't gone through all the problems that are raised by the question of whether this science even exists. And so metaphysics inquiry into its own possibility is the object that it will inquire further into, and we make progress this way. Yeah, Tim.
Well, I mean, maybe the way I was thinking of it was that it's a matter of thought, as thought, insofar as all of the questions that or the puzzles that he presents they're really prolegomena to the activity of observing physical matter.
Right.
So that they really are not even amenable to being solved through anything but thought. You have to, you can't go and find out the answer to any of these puzzles by engaging in observation.
Right.
It's really they can only be answered by getting your thoughts straight.
Right. Exactly right. I love that expression, getting thoughts straight. So, one way to think this is this. This ancillary set of puzzles is not like a difficult terrain you have to traverse, and then on the other side is a sunny landscape where you can then start looking at things, and it's like you've left Plato's cave, and now you're in the realm of truth, and you just kind of go look around and describe things. So I'm arguing against this notion of two distinct terrains. There's the puzzle terrain, and then there's this terrain that you're freed to by solving the puzzles, and that terrain is completely separate from what you've come to understand in working through the puzzles. But rather, working through the puzzles at the same time generates the terrain of metaphysics. And they're not two separate terrains. Right. Any further thoughts about this before we move on? And please say something if you find that incredibly unconvincing or thoroughly confusing. I don't want to steamroll anybody.
I mean, I can kind of see where you're coming from on that last point, because as we get into answering these puzzles, it's really these questions are about what things are. Whereas science then is a completely different domain, because it's more about what things do.
Right.
what is their behavior, but you really can't get to what they are by doing more science.
Right.
You can only get to what things are through the metaphysical inquiry. Well, what amounts to metaphysical inquiry.
Right.
And even if you don't call it metaphysics.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully put. And it, a great genius said exactly the same thing, namely Niels Bohr. So you're in good company here, Tim. And he said, in science, the more we know about what things do, the less we know about what things are. And that itself is a very interesting puzzle. How can that be? And I'm not going to try to answer it, but it shows an incredible awareness on Bohr's part of the difference between a philosophical inquiry and a scientific inquiry. But anyway, yeah, no, I appreciate that very much. Thanks. Philip.
So we don't have to take unity on faith.
Never.
Right.
Okay, I'm asking jokingly, but can you ask what the motivation of that? Can you say what the motivation for that question is?
Well, I'd begun thinking about the perpetual debates about monotheism versus polytheism. But those are transposed debates about the nature of unity.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah.
So the unity will become, I hate to use the word revealed, maybe made manifest in the course of the work itself. And it could be that the work itself also actually creates the unity. I would hold that as a possibility.
Okay.
I don't think the unity is something outside the work.
Right. Well, that's one of those weird things about unity is you can't stumble over one or kick one. they are what they're understood to be, and so Aristotle gives us an incredible catalog of different unities and the way in which different things are one, and so we need to kind of pay attention to how he makes us aware of these different unities.
It's one puzzle for me is why they're puzzles at all. Why doesn't our mind immediately reflect what is?
Well, because its lower half is mired in flesh.
Oh my God. All right.
And so it is in itself confused, and our work as philosophers is to free it from the flesh. Go ahead, Mike.
I wanted to add, I agree with Tim, but I did want to add, I think science is concerned with what things with the differentia. I'm thinking like biology or cladistic systematics, but I think it's in a manner that really focuses on accidentals and things that don't really reveal the essence or the ousia of what a thing is. For them, what a thing is sort of the accidental predicates that are associated with the thing, like a dog is 2 ears, 4 legs, or something like that. But what it really is to be dogness, and maybe they are interested in it, but I don't know if they can answer it. I don't know. But I guess to summarize, I do think they are interested in answering the questions, what something is, but they're approaching it in a way, because they haven't asked these 14 questions, in a way that's not getting to the essence.
Yeah. And really, that's part of what Aristotle's doing right here, is asking, is there even such a thing as a science of essence? Plato said there was, and and Empedocles said there was, and they gave their different versions of it, right? But because they're different, that's a puzzle, and because their respective versions gave rise to all sorts of questions that that lead to more tangles and more puzzles, right? That all has to all be worked out before we can even say yes or no, whether Empedocles or Plato is right that there is such a science, the science of form, the science of essence, that there is such a thing as essence, that could be a science of, or not, science is just episteme. So I tend to prefer to use knowledge, but science has other connotations. But yeah, okay, cool. I got a couple hands. Tim, then Peter.
Yeah, I don't think that science really legitimately can even ask the question, what is something? Because its methodology is only about where did it come from?
Mm-hmm.
What does it do? Where does it go? What is the cause and effect? But the minute it asks the question, what is it? It has no methodology for that. And that's where that immediately becomes a philosophical question.
Yep.
Because you can't pose an experiment to get at what something is. You can only get at what it's made of, what it's where it came from,
Mm-hmm.
what was its cause in terms of physical cause and effect. So I don't know. I guess that's enough rambling on that.
No, it's an important point that it isn't made off enough, so I appreciate it. Peter, then Tyler.
Well, I'm going to disagree with Tim and say that it's not quite enough rambling about it, because I believe I think it's in beta 2, Aristotle does point out the fact that science cannot answer the question about what it is, but only about relations of attributes of a thing in the relation. So I guess Aristotle kind of agrees with you on that. But the point I really wanted to bring out was, and I feel like I'm a broken record in this seminar so far, in that I think the posterior analytics is something very important, that because Aristotle does get to the point about what constitutes explanation. And it's, for him, it's a specific type. It's not just any syllogism. It's a syllogism with a lot of conditions applied to it. And if people have, the Reeves translation that we're working from, and they actually have, if you go to like both notes 251 and 269, I thought were very interesting. And just the one quote from 269 was, since scientific starting points must figure in demonstrations, the extremes and middle terms must come from the same genus, which is one of the conditions that he puts up on syllogisms, is that science can only explain things if they're already related in some sense. They're all the same genus. Mm-hmm. So in a syllogism, you have, all men are mortal, Socrates is man, Socrates is immortal. Middle term there is man. Mm-hmm. And Socrates and mortality are the extremes, but they're all the same genus. Otherwise, there couldn't be anything. You can only relate things conceptually if there has some sort of commonality at some level amongst them, i.e., they are the same genus. Mm-hmm. And if you look at he examines all the P1, all these various puzzles 1 through 12 or whatever they are in here. He is always trying to bring out, what is the common thing amongst all these things, right? And so, he invokes genus a lot. Anyway, but in the posterior analytics, it's like the explanation cannot keep going back forever. You have to have these starting points, and these starting points are not explained in the same way that a scientific explanation is explained. You just have to, and the starting points are more well known than what is derived from them. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so I think at some point we need to brush up against posterior analytics. And then, anyway, I'm just babbling too. So I will leave off with apologize for babbling the way that Tim apologized for babbling.
No. Yeah, I wish we could just read all of Aristotle simultaneously. But I think it's immeasurably important that people who are familiar with other texts bring that textual evidence or textual reflection into our conversation about metaphysics, because that's how we can do this somewhat more synoptically. So bring up posterior analytics as often as you want, Peter. It's always helpful. Tyler.
Yeah, I was gonna say it regards experimentation. They have a structure of relating things in terms of what happens when they interact, but you don't have the tools in science as method to say what the X and Y are that are relating to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And you also, at a very basic level, you don't have an answer for what is in the the famous Bill Clinton way, or the or the philosophical way. So what is means in science is left undealt with. You can't arrive at it through the methodology of science itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting, because if is imports all sorts of logical structure like genus and species and well, that whole apparatus, right? Then that's not actually thematized in contemporary natural science, but it's deployed in the way in which the objects that it's investigating are thought, right? That things have attributes. We don't need, the scientists can't empirically ask, how is it possible for things to have attributes? That's outside their scope, the way Tim and Peter have mentioned. But that doesn't mean it isn't a real question. That's one of the presuppositions of any natural science that just goes into its machinations, things having attributes. And things, how can one thing, and they also don't need to ask, how can something be the same as itself if it changes its attributes? But Aristotle wonders a great deal about this very thing. Oh yeah, anyway, thanks. What's the order? Tim and then Mike.
Yeah, just a short comment that, science does ask, what is something made of? So it is interested and has a methodology for inquiring the composition of things.
Mm-hmm.
But then that just kind of pushes the question of what something is, it kind of presumably to another level. And still it's not aware really of the puzzles really that Aristotle is asking.
Right.
Because those puzzles don't even come at the level of physical composition.
Right.
They come at the level of realizing, oh, even when I ask that question, I have to kind of raise myself above the physical thing and ask what thingness even is, or what composite. What composites or the things of which something is composed, what those even are, separately from the physical thing that I am particularly looking at. And then that kind of goes back to the whole thing about resin electricity and glass electricity. Electricity is abstracted away from the things in which we observe it, mm-hmm. as kind of a universal. And so anyway, I started rambling again.
No, it's very important. Higher order always sounds kind of spooky to a naturalist, and it's often defused by given some kind of nominalist redescription of this so-called higher order. But everybody's pointing out this other dimension that we have catapulted ourselves into by trying not just to explain, but to understand explanation. And that's the level of these questions, these puzzles, and all these terms that Aristotle's been throwing at us. So I think that the more we marinate in that conception of this higher order problem, the more we understand what metaphysics is trying to, well, it's not trying to achieve it, but the more we understand what the object of metaphysics would be. Mike.
Yeah, I agree with Tyler that we don't know what is, but I think what Aristotle is arguing is that to know something the best is to know what it is, whatever that is. And I just wanted to read, just going back to the text,
Yeah.
in the Reeves, it's on page 34.
Cool.
And on starting on line 13, I guess. So it's like around the...
Thank you. 34, line 13.
Yeah, I'll just read this if you
Beautiful.
all don't mind. For since people may scientifically know the same thing in many ways, we say that the person who knows what the object is by its being knows it better than the person who knows it by its not being, whatever that means. And of those who know it better, some know it better than others. And the person who knows it best is the person who knows what it is, not the person who knows merely its quality or quantity, or what it can naturally do or have happen to it.
Right.
And I guess the latter is what's the realm of science.
Yeah, and I find this a slightly unfortunate translation when you said whatever that is, and you're right to ask because it's not very helpful. But if we retranslate it as we say that the person who knows what the object is by knowing its being knows better than the person who knows it by not knowing what it is. All right. So if I say that's not a rooster, and the other person says it is a chicken, right? The one who says it's a chicken has given us, who knows better than, and gives us more information and gives us more determinate understanding of that object than the one who only knows negatively and say, well, it's not a rooster, or, you know, it's not a cloud, right? But that, yeah. So, Mike, did you want to follow up and just make again the point you wanted to bring up by reading that passage?
Oh, I'm just repeating myself in that I do think on one level, and maybe a very superficial, naive level, science is interested in what things are, but it's in terms of, yeah, like Peter said, like a jumble of attributes. So I'll differentiate a dog from a cat because cats meow. But what is a cat, or what it is to be a cat, I think, if I might say, is right now beyond the ability of science to answer.
Yeah. You know, in early modernity, I mean, thinkers are pretty clear about this, that, you know, they're like, who cares what things are? What we want to know is what can they do for us, right? How can they justify their existence? Well, by being useful to our ends, right? And so, you know, this being that leads to all sorts of, you know, foggy theological garbage, and they were partly right about that. But so the nature of the question was changed. We don't care what things are. What can they do so that we can harness them to our ends, right? And that's all great. I mean, that's all wonderful. And we have advances of medicine and warfare, all these things, right? Technology, to that turn, right? It just starts getting dicey when we turn to those sciences that cannot tell us what things are, but only how they can be employed to our ends. And then start using it as a resource for telling us what we are. I mean, that's where, I mean, that's ultimately the danger of this whole set of illusions that crop up around science. You know, that which cannot tell us anything about what things are is now propped up as an authority on what we are. Anyway, so thank you for that remark, Mike. All right, so in extension of answering Rich's question, which is to get to some of the specific knots and see the way in which they might be made sense of by this thought thinking itself trope that we've been using. Let's look at least the first one here. My God, it's already 5:20. We should do these things 4 hours long, just to get anywhere.
Garth had a hand up. Probably.
Oh, I apologize. I had my little participants window down, so I didn't see it. Garth, thanks, Tim. Go ahead, Garth.
Yeah, I wanted to say that it doesn't seem like most of science has really benefited humanity as much as you claim.
Well,
it's taken us out of the balance with nature, and so it's posed like serious problems for us that it seems like we're unable to solve through science. You know, if we were without the technology that we have today, then we wouldn't need to worry about remaining in balance with nature.
Right.
And you know, on top of that, like the development of technology takes away our free agency in a certain sense. Like if you have like a machine that will create something for you and all you have to do is press the button, you're not creating it anymore yourself. The machine is doing it for you, but you're still taking credit for it. And so it's creating a separation between ourselves and reality, so to speak. It's destroying the actual experience of living, which is developing mastery of yourself and of your environment, integrating with other people. You know, we are not in physical proximity with other people anymore. We're not touching them so much, interacting with them so much, and that's not natural for our bodies. So it's leading to all kinds of psychological problems for us, you know. And people are even talking about like digital singularity, like just upload your consciousness to a machine. But it seems to me that you wouldn't exist anymore. It would just be like a deterministic copy that acts like you if you did that. And you know, I think technology has created an illusion for us that it can solve problems that it can't solve.
Yeah. No, thanks for bringing up. I'm so opposed to science's encroachment into philosophical territory that people think I'm anti-science. So whenever I have an opportunity, I try to talk up science. But I'm glad somebody else is remarking that it's not all gravy with science and technology and industry. Thank you. Okay. Let's pop the text up and go to page 33. We don't need to read this whole list, this laundry list, just because it's just meaningless until we get more details. So let's go straight to the details, which is page 33 in the Reeve, at the beginning of beta 2. And let's just follow them through and see if we understand why he's even bringing these things up. Sometimes it's easy to see, sometimes it's quite difficult to see. All right, so let's just start with this first paragraph. I'll read it. The first of the puzzles concerns the things we mentioned first, namely, whether it belongs to one science or to more than one to get a theoretical grasp on all the kinds of causes. For how could it belong to one science to know the starting points if these are not contraries? Okay. Oh. Let's talk about that. And in talking about it, let's integrate that footnote that Peter brought up. Okay, so why is this a puzzle? We barely touched on contraries when we talked about the categories, so that you might be rusty on that. Peter.
Well, just for everybody's benefit, the difference between a contrary and a contradictory
Mhm.
is that contraries are related opposites and contradictories are non-related. Example, red is a color. Its contraries are other colors like blue and pink and yellow and green. Red is not green and not pink and not blue. Those are contraries. Contradictory is like the whole rest of the universe. The contradictory to red, not red, includes blue and pink and yellow are not red, but so is the angst of the middle class and the number 12 and the book sitting on my counter. Those are all part of not being red, contradictory. So contrary is a much more focused and interesting way of saying not this. It's a more, and it's the genus color includes red, pink, yellow, blue, and green, but it does not include the angst of the middle class nor the books lying around on my floor. So that's the first thing I wanted to say about that. And he mentions genus in here and contraries. So contraries are related opposites, not just arbitrary opposites.
Right. So can I follow up on, and Peter, just get your understanding of this? So at one point he describes contraries as extremes within a genus, right? And so bringing up color, I would have thought black and white, right, as being somehow, they belong to the genus color, but they somehow are exclusive of one another in a way that seems that they're extremes, right? And he doesn't say different colors, but just black and white. So maybe he's just using the most obvious example. But do you see a difference between the contrary relation of black and white to the difference between red and green?
Aristotle brought up black and white. I missed that.
Yeah, but not in this passage elsewhere. You always got to go elsewhere with Aristotle. Okay, but I'm just wondering about your thoughts on that.
Black and white might be even a sub genus of color in a sense, in that I don't know. I'd have to look at that passage.
Okay.
That's an interesting point. I don't have anything to say about that right
The
now.
reason why I bring it up is if red and green as just two different colors in the genus color can be contraries and not just different, then it doesn't seem to be any problem having the genus cause and the four causes, because being different, they'd be contraries. But he says they're not contraries. And so they don't, so my understanding of this is they don't have that oppositional quality like black and white or hot and cold or even and odd. Yeah, go ahead.
So the point, so I guess you're bringing up the point. If you read it, you bring up the quote point in the quote in the first paragraph of B2, for how could it, kinds of causes, belong to one science to know the starting points if these are not contraries?
Mm-hmm.
And you go back to the footnote, which I liked, 269, I guess it was. Sorry, I'm fumbling around here. In the posterior analytics, he's going to point out that the extremes in the middle term all has to come from the same genus, i.e., if there was going to be, so going back to our example, if there was going to be one science of all the kinds of causes, they would all have to be of the same genus in order for there to be one science of all those causes. So he's questioning, how could it belong to one science to know the starting points if these are not contraries? And if contraries are only of the alternatives under a genus, I think that's what he's pointing out there. In order to be an alternatives under one genus would be the same thing as to be to belong to one science, because it's the middle terms and the extremes would all be within that same genus.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of new to me. I'm not doubting, but I'm just having difficulty integrating it into this first paragraph. Well, let's hear some more voices and flesh this out a little bit, and just to hear your understanding of what is this puzzle? What is the actual puzzle? You know, he's so terse all the time. We have to flesh it out.
So can I ask the question, when he says, if these are not contraries in that
Mhm.
sentence, is he, if these are not contraries? So he is assuming that they are not contraries.
Right.
So these are not contraries, therefore
Mm-hmm.
they don't, or they belong to one science.
I think he's pointing out that if they are not contraries, they can't belong to one science.
Exactly. Exactly. If they're contraries, contraries are always known through their genus. And so you go to the higher order, the genus, right? Hot and cold are known through the genus of, I don't know, temperature or something like that. And so we know heat as the absence of cold, and we know cold as the absence of heat. And so they have this this kind of relationship to one another. But that's not the way the causes are related to one another. The presence of one is not the absence of the other.
Right. So he's saying that so in another way to say it, more less convolutedly maybe, is these are not contraries, therefore they do not belong to one science.
Exactly. That's why I understand.
He's not asserting that they are not contraries. He's asking, because the sentence says, or
right?
how could it belong unless they were contraries?
Right, but he's stating it in rhetorically, right?
Right. It's just a puzzle, right? He's not coming down anywhere, but he says this is a kind of puzzle that the right. We wanted to know being, but to know being, we need to know the cause of things. And it turns out that there are 4 different kinds of cause. So now that leads the question: well, is there one science of these 4 things, or does each one demand its own science, the science of finality, the science of materiality, etc. Right? And that only comes about, this problem comes about because the 4 causes don't have the relationship of contrariety to one another. So I agree that he's going to start shifting the meaning of what a genus is and what a cause is in order to start solving this problem. But we're just at the beginning, and we're just taking the assumptions of Aristotle's predecessors and his early assumptions as they stand. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, I was gonna just mention modality as when it comes to contraries. I think that was just gonna be a helpful way to think of it. And then regards the causes, we would have a problem if they're not contraries, or if they don't all belong to, in some sense, one modality.
Mm-hmm. What are modalities? I mean, can you define modalities you're using it here?
So I'm just using it in a fairly simple sense.
Good.
Like with positive and negative, with regard to charge, electric charge. That's a example. They belong to they're sides of a unity in a sense.
Okay.
So if they're all modes of the same thing, you can have one science of that thing, of which they are modes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
If they're not, then you have a problem of how to understand the relation of the distinct sciences of the different causes. You would almost need a science of sciences in order to have a complete explanation.
And where did that last move come from? Why would you need the science of sciences?
Because if all 4 causes were different, right, we wouldn't understand what causes them to all be causes.
Mm-hmm.
What causes them to be the same in some respect.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just point out that in some of these other problems as we go along, that problem of just sort of assuming that there has to be some commonality upon things doesn't always work out. I'm not saying it doesn't work out in this case, but
Right. So how do we get into this quandary, right? We got into this quandary because or who's we, right? The intellect gets into this quandary because to know scientifically is to know the genus, and knowing the genus, one knows why the species are as they are, and one can distinguish, the species. So knowing that what an animal is, or knowing animality, we understand a lot of the life properties of all animals. And what we don't know through the genus is are the differentia, right? Animality doesn't explain to us what makes a goat different from a snail. All it does is show us what's common and not what's different. And we need different science. We need alternative sciences of other genera, other genuses, other genera, to study those differentia. Because within that genus, we can't articulate any. There's no subsuming the differentia into under the genus. So we get into so thinking about science, thinking about scientific knowing as knowing the higher order genus, and then explaining the properties of the species through the genus, gets us into this first problem. Okay, so that is, of course, an Aristotelian assumption about demonstrative sciences, that they work that way. So yeah, before I head on, lovely to see Keith. What's your thought, Keith?
Yeah, you stating that way, I think, made it clear how the genus of species is different than its different causes.
Yeah.
Because if you have two different species, well, okay, one species is going to be a sheep and have its own set of characteristics or essentialities, and one one's going to be, monkey, have its own different set. With the causes, everything is going to have those four causes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not actually distinct in that way.
Right.
You remove a cause, and you've just removed your understanding of something. So you can't actually separate them out like that. You have to have all four causes, or you don't actually know something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's helpful, and that actually brings us to the next development of this same problem. That this deal. Okay, so we got four causes, and we don't really, and all we know is that they have a name in common, right? Cause, final cause, material cause. But the problem is they don't have this contrary relationship, and so it doesn't seem like they are subsumable under a common genus, namely something explanatory. We can subsume them under the name cause, but that's not explanatory. If it's just a name, it has to be some nature that explains their nature, and so these are the kinds of difficulties we're getting into, and we're getting into them because we're dealing with primary or first things. So, I mean, does everybody kind of feel comfortable with what has transpired thus far in terms of understanding, why this is a puzzle?
Except you should just own essence as a name. Don't call it nature. Don't try and slip it under the rug there. It's an essence. Nature is actually something different, but anyway.
Well, I didn't say physis. Okay, but yeah, you're right. When I say nature, I do mean essence. Right.
I mean, I think we have to be, at this point, we have to be totally bought into the existence of, or not existence, but the being of these four causes. If we're not somehow convinced that those are necessary or pertinent or relevant to describing, then none of this is going to be convincing.
Right.
And so we must have it down why, like say, formal cause is necessary in order to be able to describe the world.
Right. No, exactly, and that's kind of the point of the book A. He's going through all these different theories and what kind of causes are they what kind of cause are they employing in their theories, and his sense, well, at least his conclusion is there's nobody comes up with anything more than these four that he established in the physics, and what they understood of them wasn't very much yet. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
So I actually we're talking about the physics rather than and posterior analytics. That's good, but I agree also that I would actually ask Tim: do you have any other? If you're trying to explain something, is there an explanation that you would bring up that wouldn't fall under one of Aristotle's four causes? It's a question, because he basically asks that, says, when you look at the people who've gone before us, they all end up being in one or more of these four areas. So I assume that must be complete now.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I can't say that I disagree with Aristotle. It's just that I'm not well immersed in the thinking in those four causes.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of more, I raised that point as really an erstwhile materialist, right? Because that's my world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very hard for me to easily think in terms of these four causes when I'm really just, I think in terms of material cause, as though that's the only one.
Right.
And so I just raise it, I guess, maybe for the benefit of the group, those of us who are still kind of knee-jerk materialists, that really have to get our head around why formal cause is necessary to describe the world. And if we don't do that, then this is just going to seem like it's just mistaken all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
But like he says at the very beginning of we need to understand the puzzles, and we need to understand why the four causes are necessary. And if we don't, then we might as well be watching America's Got Talent or something,
So can the materialist answer anything other than the material cause, roughly speaking? I mean, certainly not the final cause. Efficient, maybe you can hand wave around that one. Formal.
Yeah, that was Aristotle's point. All the materialist causes had no way to account for motion, and since everything that they were explaining had something to do with change, a material account alone was always incomplete, and so they needed the efficient cause, and that's of course the beginning of modern science is matter in motion. Those two Aristotelian causes are retained, and the others are dropped. So at bottom, you've got to be a matter in motionalist, Tim, and not just a materialist. Motion's got to be a problem for you.
This goes to show that I don't have, I'm not immersed in it yet enough, but okay. I realize from this paragraph that I need to be.
Awesome. So, any hands up? No. All right. All right. So let's read a little bit more and see how it relates to that first paragraph. Could I get a reader just so I don't have to listen to my voice all the time for that second paragraph? Actually, we don't even need the whole second paragraph. Oh, well, what the hell? Why not? Do I get a reader? Okay, awesome. Thanks, Peter.
Further, to many beings, not all the starting points pertain. For in what way can there be a starting point of movement for immovable things? Or in what way can the nature of the good be such a starting point, if indeed everything that is good intrinsically and because of its own nature is an end and a cause in this way, namely that for its sake the other things both come to be and are, and if the end, that is the sake for what, and if the end, that is the sake for what for the sake of which is an end of some action, and all actions involve movement. So in the case of immovable things, the starting point could not exist, nor could there be any good in itself. That is why in mathematics, too, nothing is shown through this cause, nor is there any demonstration where the cause is this. because it is better or worse.
I think that's good for the paragraph. The rest is just spicy anecdote. Okay, so how have we moved further into these puzzles in this paragraph? What do you understand happened here?
Very little.
Hmm?
That was tough. That was tough to parse.
Oh, yeah. Fair enough. Peter, thanks for starting.
It was also tough to read because it was tough to parse. Anyway, so what was my point? I've completely forgotten my point.
Okay, that's okay. You can come back. All right. So I think one way to frame the discussion is the relationship between one and many, right? We think of being as one, and then we find out that in order to understand the being of things and what they are, to know what things are, we're led to these four causes. And these four causes, it's unclear, A, what the relationship is to one another, and B, what the relationship is to being. You got your point now, Peter?
Yeah, so the first sentence, further to many beings, not all the starting points pertain. So he's getting back to his question about, is there one science that can contain all the starting points, or
Right.
do you need different sciences for each of the starting points?
Mm-hmm.
And here he's basically saying, well, to many beings, not all starting points pertain. So presumably you can't have one science of all the different starting points. Presumably each starting point, or maybe some small subset of starting points, would comprise one science, I guess, is what his point there is.
Mm-hmm. So if to know is to know the four causes, then anything that doesn't have all the causes at its basis is somehow incomplete or unknowable, it seems. Right? And so we're going to need a different, so now it seems like we need, again, at first was the thought, well, maybe we need a science for each cause. And now we're starting to think, oh, maybe we need a science for each kind of thing that is explicable through a specific set of causes. So one science won't do. We need multiple sciences to deal with the fact that some things have efficient causes and material causes, but they don't have formal causes. And other things like immovable things don't have any efficient causes. Right? So now we're differentiating our one science into many sciences. And I think it's important to recognize every time the one science breaks into many sciences, that spells the demise of metaphysics. Right? So whenever the one breaks into the many, we've got a problem. And what we're trying to figure out is what is the one that is the object of metaphysics and that would allow metaphysics to be one science? What is the one object, right? And at the beginning, it's this question of being, and that question of being is still very vague as of yet. And we're seeing all these puzzles that arise in the way of trying to understand that. Okay, thanks for listening. I got a couple of hands. Tim, then Tyler.
I think, Tyler, you had your hand up first, right?
Go ahead.
Okay, so an immovable thing. So we must not then be talking about a physical thing, right?
Right.
So he's talking about an immovable thing, presumably substance.
No, probably mathematics, mathematical
Oh,
objects. Numbers, triangles. No.
Okay, so that's an example of, now I didn't quite follow what you just said because I thought he was actually trying to make the point that there are different sciences because all things don't have the same starting points, and each science must start with a starting point.
Yes.
So for mathematics, that's going to be a different science from the science of, let's say, locomotion or
That's
something.
right.
Okay.
So it seems like the science of immovable things will be a different science than of movable things because they have different starting points. And now our science of being is breaking down into different regional sciences. And that's a puzzle, right? If there's a science of being, it's got to be one science, and it can't break down into many regional sciences that don't have any, well, I mean, they don't have an object in common, which is to say, neither of them are sciences of being as such.
Yeah,
Because each one excludes some beings.
right. Or on the assumption that being covers both.
Right. Exactly. Right. Tyler.
Yeah, a couple things. I think one, Aristotle is known for saying being is said in many ways. So I think
we'll say that.
Part of this has to do with an equivocal sense of being with regards to accidental relations rather than necessary. And part of this also has to do with movement and change, which themselves have to, in some sense, not move or change.
Right.
If we're going to make sense of all of this as one science rather than two separate sciences.
Right. So yeah, I followed you on the equivocation point. Do you mind repeating your second point, just because I didn't get it?
Oh, it's just the Plato's response to Heraclitus, right? Is that we can't, if we say of things, of beings, that they change, change itself has to, in some sense, remain the same for us to understand that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. He says something like that in the former book. Okay, but yeah, I don't want to belabor that. So is there any, so is this passage now completely and totally transparent to everybody? If not, let's bring up the questions and hone in on it, right?
Only believe in transparent explanations of the eye.
Okay. Okay, so, but hopefully people more or less get this notion that we're looking for a science, and that science is one science. And the nature of the thing that investigates is one essence or one nature, right? It might be complex, but it's still one thing and not a bunch of mutually unrelated things. Right. And so it seems like, for instance, immovable things and movable things are unrelated, right? Because they're radically different. They belong to radically different spheres, right? Can there be a science of both of them that isn't just, that doesn't abstract away from everything that makes each of these realms what they are, that doesn't abstract away from motion, or that doesn't abstract away from lack of motion? It seems like every attempt to smush these two realms together would just abstract or reduce something pertinent to that thing's nature. And if we are going to do metaphysics, we can't just abstract away the stuff that bothers us, right? We have to do justice to it. And that doing justice to us is part of grasping how metaphysics can be one and how its object can be one. But at least at the starting point, the manyness of the causes are causing the question, one science or many science? Go ahead, Philip.
So the issue here is, how can we know unity as unity?
Yeah.
And the first puzzle is that to know something, it's to know its cause.
Yeah.
And if there are causes that themselves are not a unity, then that breaks down the unity of either knower or knowing.
Yeah. Yeah, now we have, so to speak, different worlds. We have the world of the immovable and the world of the movable. and we can't integrate them into one world, right? Because there's nothing in common. If we say, well, both of them are, we're begging the question, what content are we thinking in this are that somehow unifies these two mutually exclusive domains, right? And I think this is the problem. I mean, I'm thinking about this, I think is, if you think about this, what is the content of are? When I say, well, they still are, right? What's the content of that are, of that being? And I think this is exactly what happens with people, the way people use the word exist, right? Yeah, but they exist, right? And, okay, so what's the content of that, right? And then people stumble for words because there is no content. They know that there's something there to be said, but they don't comprehend being yet, right? And so, yeah.
So there's no such thing as partial rationality.
Oh, excellent point. No, impossible. I mean,
Yeah.
I agree with you. Maybe you want to explain that. Maybe that's not patently obvious to everybody, but
It's not like there's a rationality that applies to sociology and a rationality that applies to psychology and a rationality that applies to art history.
Exactly.
It's either if there is no rationality, then there's actually we're back to will to power. That's all we got. Yeah.
You good?
There's something else floating around. It'll come back. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Please raise your hand. Okay. Tim, then Charlie.
Well, I hear you going to a conclusion that that we have to avoid breakdown because then we're going to have this arbitrary division. But I see Aristotle in this paragraph saying things like as you said, mathematics is immovable, and therefore it isn't something that is good intrinsically because of its own nature. It's not an end and a cause in that way. So what I see in this paragraph is he is differentiating. There are some things like immovable things like mathematics that don't have the same cause.
Yep.
And so it's not subsumed under the nature of the good as a starting point.
Right. Absolutely.
So okay, so that seems to be then comport with your understanding, but he hasn't actually gotten to the point of this as being a problem yet, right?
Right. Well, I'm just, yeah. So, but he is listing it as a puzzle. And so I'm just trying to make clear how this might be understood as a puzzle.
I see. Okay. Maybe he draws that out later. Okay. Thanks.
Don't count on it. Probably in another book that we're not reading. Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, I was in pretty good shape.
Thanks, Rashid. Ciao.
Reading the metaphysics until I got to B, number 2 here. And I'm really lost in the weeds now. So I think, I don't know.
Are you puzzled? Are you puzzled? If you are, you should be.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure even what question to ask.
Yeah.
So I'll think about this and maybe ask it next week. And
right. But I think
you have to have all 4 causes for each substance, don't you?
No. Well, he hasn't told us yet. And all we know is that to know is to know the causes. And to know,
right.
and now the question, but we still don't know whether there is a science of the causes, or whether because of their nature, because of what they are different, we need different sciences for them. The kind of knowing that is final knowing and knowing finality, is that also knowing materiality or not? If not, it seems like we need a different kind of science, a different kind of knowledge for the material than we need for the final.
Yeah. Okay. That part is pretty clear.
Good.
But at any rate, that's okay. Thank you. I'll work on this.
Okay, well, no, please do. And please, if a question pops up, just interrupt. At least me. Peter.
So this is more of a grammatical question, I guess. I'm trying to parse this. I guess it's the third sentence in the second paragraph. It says, starts, or in what way can nature of the good be such a starting point? And then it goes on and on and on and on. My question is this following roughly the right, throwing out all the parenthetical phrasing?
Yeah.
In what way can nature of the good be a starting point if actions involve movement?
I don't think that's right.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. How can it be a starting point? I took it to mean, how could it be a starting point of things that are immovable if it's a starting point of movable things?
Okay, right. Okay, that's very good. Yes.
Then I understood that to be such a starting point, namely starting point the way in which, or starting point for immovable things. I know, and that's going on the assumption that everything requires the four causes in order to be made intelligible, and therefore for us to be able to know them. And now he's starting to say, well, there's at least some obvious sense in which there are things that cannot be related to certain causes, immovable things. Yeah, go ahead.
And I just want to point out again that the four causes and the starting points are different things, because in the chat group, there's been some little confusion about that, conflating starting points with causes, I think.
Right, and he does often refer to the starting points as causes as starting points. So I think it's okay to be confused on that matter right now.
Where does he say that the causes can be used as starting points? Well, I mean,
I'll find the passage. But he does say so that sometimes.
The question is, it may be that there's no one science of all the starting points, but perhaps there is a science of the causes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fair conclusion based on the text that we have. I think that there's a more intimate relationship between starting point or principles, right? Arche and beginnings, and causes. He doesn't say knowing the starting points is knowing the thing. He says knowing the causes, right? And yet this science is the science of causes and starting points. So there is some ambiguity there. I think that's legit, and hopefully it will clear up eventually.
Yeah, because I thought that the starting points were the causes, because he talked about the eternal cause, and that then was a little ambiguous about whether the four causes were the eternal cause, but it was really the starting points that weren't just the temporal sequential starting points, and those were the causes that are the things that start things out.
What about the movable versus the immovable? Weren't those starting points? And those are not, movable is not one of the causes, right?
Well, I mean, the unmoved mover is the eternal cause, right? So that is.
But are they identical? Are they the same thing? Is the unmoved mover the same as movable versus immovable as starting points for a science? Because movable things, the physics as we call it today versus math as we call it today, they have different starting points.
Yeah, can I just looking at the very beginning of this paragraph you just read, Peter, further to many beings, not all the starting points pertain, for in what way can there be a starting point of movement for immovable things, right? And there he's using starting point of movement as the cause of movement. And here starting point and cause are synonymous. So, I mean, that's just an indicator. I'm not saying that that's a proof that these are simply synonyms, but he does go back and forth in this language, and he never sets forth some kind of radical difference between the two. Does anyone want to follow up on that, or can I go to Philip, who's had his hand up for a while? You had your hand up for a while, Philip. I just wanted to make sure. I thought maybe
I
you
do.
recovered.
So I think one way to, I'm thinking about the religious aspect here. I think it is not essential. I think it is primarily historical. I think Aristotle may be looking at societies and thinking, well, you know, how do we produce unity? And he said, basically, we'll produce it via, you know, ritual or creed or sacrifice. There are various ways that we produce unity. But then he's got his much deeper point is that what is both consequence and cause of unity is intelligibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that if intelligibility itself is if intelligibility for intelligibility to be coherent means there's unity.
Yes.
Those are actually they're actually synonymous expressions. So one way to look at the puzzles is the puzzles are ways in which intelligibility might turn out to be incoherent. Which of course would destroy the nature of intelligibility itself. It's like really fundamental. I mean, there's nothing, I'm not sure there's anything more fundamental than what he's talking about right here. Where he doesn't go, and this is gonna, like if he was a current academic writing, his first puzzle would be, can people of this social class and background have a different unity than people of this other social class and background? He didn't even say that, right? He says, well, it's different for Persians and Spartans and Dorians and Ionians, and he doesn't even raise it as a potential issue. So to our mind, it's like, what?
The abyssal ignorance of the Greeks is just something to marvel at. That's right. So I mean, yeah. You're going to bring me down a polemical tangent. I'm just going to.
No. That was a red herring thrown in at 6:07 on our Aristotle seminar. So, but it's the point, and I was just this point about intelligibility and coherence, and yes, I would say the unraveling of the puzzles is itself cohering.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I kind of like that, and yeah, I kind of like that. But I'm going to resist the temptation to translate that into thought thinking itself language. But maybe everybody can do that on their own. A little practice. Peter, go ahead. You have your hand up, Peter.
Oh, sorry, my internet was also just crapping out on me. I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly, but I thought you were making the argument that starting points and causes were the same.
Mm.
And I'm of the different opinion, and my evidence, or the thing that leads me to that, is the first sentence of the second paragraph. Further, to many beings, not all the starting points pertain.
Mm-hmm.
So starting points don't pertain to every one of these beings, but presumably the four causes did. So if we have something that doesn't pertain to all the beings, but something that does, then they should be different.
That's so funny that you and I cite the exact same sentence as evidence of our diametrically opposed positions.
Right.
Right. Well, obviously that means that this piece of evidence is deeply ambiguous, and so we both have to retract it as evidence, and or get into a deep philological argument. But yeah, you know what? I think that we should just have that question in mind as we assemble further evidence. You know, what are the starting points? Are they the causes? Are they sometimes the causes? And I think that's, you know, this is something Aristotle does all the time, and I don't have any evidence for it right with this question, but he often talks about, you know, he often talks about well, substance, and treating something as substance, or as recognizing it as substance. But he also talks about taking accidents and treating them as substance, right? And in order to give a specific account of them. And so this substance concept is on the one hand opposed to accident. On the other hand, it can be used, heuristically to explore the nature of certain accidents. And so it's both the same as the accident and opposed to the accident, and in his uses. And I'm just wondering, I'm just positing the hypothesis of whether there's some kind of relationship going on here between starting points and causes that's the same as the way in which he uses substance in those two cases. Tim?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know if the assumption that everything has all four causes is correct. I remember when we asked that question earlier, we were saying, I thought, that they didn't necessarily have to have them. Right. And then I think about like mathematics or numbers, they certainly don't have an efficient cause.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
yeah, right, and that's Aristotle's point. If to know causes is to know being, and there are four causes, and then you try to know something that doesn't have all four causes, am I knowing something that is or something that isn't? And do I need a separate science in order to capture the being of the thing that I wasn't able to capture in my first science?
So then I simply misheard you when I thought you said that that an explanation included all four causes. Then there's no real contradiction here.
Did I screw up? I might have screwed up, but I don't understand where I screwed up.
I thought I heard you say that the four causes apply to everything. Well, we've just shown mathematics, efficient cause doesn't apply.
Exactly. Right.
So if my assumption hearing that you said that all four causes apply to everything is wrong,
right,
then there is no contradiction, which I was objecting to.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the relationship between causes and starting points.
Right. I was saying that starting points and causes. I was saying something. I'm pretty sure about that. No, if I was pointing out the starting points and if causes applied to everything, then they couldn't be starting points, was my point, because of that first sentence.
Right. Okay.
But if you're not saying that first thing, then my assumption about what you were saying was I was arguing against what I heard you say.
Right.
But you didn't actually say it, then I'm not arguing.
The thing is that we're trying to rehearse what Aristotle is doing, and he's doing some shadow boxing. So, I want to get Tom in because he had his hand up for an awfully long time. And Tom, do you want to get a word in edgewise? No? Okay. Well, please raise your hand when you want to talk again. I apologize, Charlie.
Well, talking about whether the four causes apply to everything. If they don't, apply to mathematics, but up here in puzzle 14, right toward the top of the page, he asks whether these things in mathematics are actually substances or not. And if he would determine that they are not substances, then you wouldn't need to be within the confines of all substances need all four causes.
So it seems like you need all four causes, but Aristotle gives us some examples of things that cannot employ one or more of the causes. So our original assumption that you needed all four causes seems to be erroneous. However, if the difference between the movable and immovable things, does that then mean that there must be at least two sciences of two sciences of wisdom or two sciences of metaphysics and not just one? Right? And how do we answer that? That's how I understand what we're saying right here. But I see Peter disagreeing. So do you want to give another take about what the puzzlement is?
Well, no, I think that there's only perhaps one science of substance or something like that. That's fine. But there might be a different science of the movable and the immovable. The question was, what the science of, he was talking about one specific science of everything, or was he just using science as a generic placeholder? There's a science of this, and there's a science of that, and there's a science of the other thing. One of those sciences might be the science of substance. That science might be the science of everything. That's fine.
I mean, it seems kind of following the line that Michael is taking, is that really we're going to eventually, or Aristotle's going to eventually conclude that there is only one science, but it is a science that encompasses things like substances. And assuming that numbers don't have substance, but they do have being, then there's one science that encompasses both things that have substance and things that do not, things that are immovable and things that are movable, things that have, presumably they all have a final cause, but I'm not quite sure about that. But some that have efficient causes or sufficient causes, and some that don't, some that have material causes and some that don't.
So yeah, as often in Aristotle, I'm not even quite sure what the terms of the debate are anymore. So maybe that's part of being puzzled. Maybe that's just part of the puzzlement. But let's just, time's over. So let's just at least summarize these first two paragraphs so it's relatively clear in our head, what the puzzlement is or why these puzzles arise. And then we'll use that as our basis for starting next time and getting through a couple more of these. And these seem to me important enough that I don't mind going slowly on this. You won't have any real extra reading. We'll just try to get through as much of B2 and B3 next time that was assigned for today. But can somebody say something about what puzzle has Aristotle established and why is it a puzzle in these first two paragraphs?
I guess I'll take a stab at it since the room is quiet.
Awesome.
So one of the puzzles is how it can be that causes relate to each other without being distinct problems. How are causes problems for each other, and is there a solution to that problem?
Okay.
That may be overly general, but
I think it's a correct approach, but I'm just not quite sure if it has the resources to kind of explain the specifics of this text. So if you want to work it out, please do, because it's illuminating. But in the meantime, I'll go to Peter.
I'll just point out that part of my problem was I forgot that we are, in these two paragraphs, we're only dealing with the first puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And that puzzle are the four causes. There's the one science of the four causes.
Mm-hmm.
I had missed that point when I got to the second paragraph because I apparently have a short attention span.
Okay.
So part of my confusion was forgetting that this was really a question about the four causes. So I have to apologize. I have to retract a lot of what I said earlier.
Okay. So where you at now?
I'm still sitting on my sofa here.
Oh, okay. But just in terms of your understanding of these two paragraphs, like after the retraction, do you have a better or worse understanding of what's going on here?
I'm gonna have to reread it now.
Okay, fair enough. I'm gonna go back. Tyler, did you want to flesh out your original conception to see how it fits the details of these paragraphs?
I want to read things because I'm completely confused now.
Okay, yeah. No, I was asking Tyler if you wanted to try that.
Oh, I have to admit to being slightly distracted by the chat.
Oh, okay.
But can we put the text up again?
Yeah, Boo should stop fiddling with the text. Just leave it up. It's boring, but just leave it up.
Page 33, perfect.
All right.
Thanks, Bo.
We're 20 minutes over time, so guys.
Yeah, no, so I'm trying to wrap it up, but we gotta wrap it up pretty.
Well, I just would chime in. I don't think that he's really establishing anything. He's teasing us.
Yes.
It's a big tease. Like, he's trying to say, okay, you think that? Well, what about this? And then if we don't like that, then what about this?
Right.
I think part of this has to do with necessary orders and relations, and part of the problem is we can think in either direction. We can think of a movable thing causing immovable things, or vice versa, depending on where we start. So if we start with moving things, it can seem as though we have to appeal to the immovable to explain them. But if we start with immovable things, it can also seem that we need to appeal to movement itself in order to explain them.
I don't think he's saying that. I mean, that at least it's not explicit. I just think that in that second paragraph, he's saying, not to many beings, not all the starting points pertain. That's kind of the first sentence in that paragraph. Then the one that we didn't read, the very next one. But then, if there are several sciences of the causes and a distinct one for each starting point, which of them should we say is the one we are inquiring into?
Right.
So he's like saying, not all beings have the same starting points. But if we have several sciences because of that, then how do we know? I guess he's going to flesh that out a little bit. Then where do we go from there?
Right.
Essentially.
So several sciences means there's no science of being, because obviously immovable things are and movable things are, and there's no one science that treats of their being, right? And so we get into we just get into this, and so that's basically accounts against the possibility of metaphysics. So Aristotle in these first two paragraphs has given us a lot of reasons for thinking that metaphysics cannot exist, right? And then the paragraph that you began, that third one, he's starting to say, well, but what are the consequences of thinking that there must be multiple sciences rather than just one science? Where does that lead us, right? And so he's kind of, basically establishing a not just an aporia, but an antinomy. Right. Mike, you've been very patient. Thanks.
Oh yeah, I was just going to comment on Tyler's interpretation, but I think Tim did that. Yeah, I think in the third paragraph, that first sentence, but then if there are several sciences of the causes, blah, 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 and a distinct one for each starting point, which one of them should we say is the one we are inquiring to? I think I wanted to point out that last one too. Even if there are several sciences of the causes, how do we match them up? What criteria? Like, how do we know science A goes with cause, the efficient cause, right?
Mm.
Like, if we have multiple ones, what is it about that would cause this? I mean, would explain this particular cause. So I think by having several sciences, other problems come up.
Exactly. And then we will have the fully fleshed out antinomy, and then we will have the fully fleshed out task of our approach to metaphysics is to solve that antinomy in all of its details. And only in solving it is there a possibility of metaphysical knowledge. And metaphysical knowledge will also contain this, the things that, or the thoughts that allowed this problem to arise, and as well as the thoughts that are generated by its solution. And there we're starting to get more content into our putative science. I'm going to leave it at that. I know a lot of people got to go, and I actually got to go too. But going to thank everybody for A, enduring my lengthy introduction, and B, having such an intense, wonderful discussion about this. And this is kind of the speed we probably should be reading Aristotle at. But
Can I just say, the one thing that I thought could have added to this discussion was some of the contrary points of view that were in the chat. I can't follow both at the same time, so I tend to focus just on the conversation. But I could tell just when I glanced over every now and then that Clark and others, maybe it was just Clark, I don't know, had some contrary points of view, and I would have liked to have had that discussion enter into the conversation as well. So that's kind of a tipping of my hat to you, Clark, and maybe to others that I didn't see. It would, hashing some of those out in kind of verbal argument would also might be helpful.
Yeah, that's Bo records these and I post the recordings, but Bo also has a separate file of the chat. And I haven't been posting those because I don't get a chance to participate in the chat, so I don't really refer to it at all, but that's probably to my detriment. Would people want the chat discussions to be posted with the recordings so that you can rehearse them and then maybe bring up some of those issues at the beginning of each successive meeting so that some of that stuff can be given its due?
We'll just have to remember not to incriminate ourselves.
No, yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. There's a certain privacy to the chat since I don't post them, and I don't want.
Well, there's only a privacy to the private chats. The public chats, I think, are postable.
Well, also we can save our chats locally if we want to. Just
for real?
Yeah.
Ciao.
Yeah, there's just a little button somewhere. I can't remember where it is. Not a button exactly.
The ellipses down in the chat thing.
Yep.
Okay.
Save chat.
Where does it save to?
Your disk drive or whatever passes for disk drive.
If you save it, it'll have a show in folder button.
Yeah, and that's not working for me right now. So what I did is I clicked File right next to that, and that gives me a place to save it.
Yeah, for me, it's in Documents and Zoom.
That for some reason that reminds me. Mike brought to my attention that Tom does a seminar on Meetup occasionally about the posterior analytics. And so that might be a really good forum to start learning that text a little bit better, and then allow these things to cross-pollinate. It was just brought to my attention, and I'm going to try to attend whenever I can on a Sunday. But if people have time and have the interest in Aristotle, that might be a really good way to, well, my seminar can augment that, or that seminar can augment this. But yeah, awesome.
Where is that?
It is on Rich's. It's a free philosophy lecture. I think it's called VPN, and then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tom, do you want to say anything about it? Tom gave me a thumbs up before, but I'm not hearing anything from him. Anyway, okay, gentlemen, we'll see you. We'll see you at the very latest next week, and we'll just continue with B2 and B3 and try to tease out.
I think Tom is unmuted.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you want to say something?
Are basic analytics, and it's that easy.
I'm sorry, you broke up. The beginning of your comments broke up, so I'm not quite sure. I don't understand what you said. You want to try it again? Uh-oh. Tom, I'm afraid your voice isn't coming across. So maybe, yeah, okay. Well, maybe you can talk about it in your group. And like I said, I just want to let everybody know about it. And I'm going to try to be there on as many Sundays as I can. I'm not sure how often you hold it, but looking forward to it. All right, y'all, take care. Thanks for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, well, the chat goes on.